Hello, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be reading some of the most horrifying creepypastas from around the web. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to subscribe. Now, let's get into the fearful frights. I don't know when you're going to read this, but I can tell you when it started. I was out for a walk alone in the woods when the entity came for me. It was beyond a blur. It was, for lack of a better term, absence of meaning. Where it hid, there were no trees. Where it crept closer, there was no grass. Through the arc it leapt at me, there was no breeze of motion. There was no air at all. As it struck, I felt the distinct sensation of claws puncturing me somewhere unseen, somewhere I'd never felt before. My hands and arms and legs and torso seemed fine, and I wasn't bleeding, but I knew I'd been injured somehow. As I fearfully ran back home, I could tell that I was less. I was vaguely tired, and it was hard to focus at times. The solution at that early stage was easy. A big cup of coffee helped me feel normal again. For a while, that subtle drain on my spirit became lost in the ebb and flow of caffeine in my system. You could say my life began that week, actually, because that was when I met March. She and I got along great, though, to be honest. I'm pretty sure I fell in love with her over the phone before we even met. It was almost as if the strong emotions of that first week made the entity fight back. It was still with me, latched onto some invisible part of my being. The first few incidents were minor, and I hardly worried about them. The color of a neighbor's car changed from dark blue to black one morning, and I stared at it before shaking my head and shrugging off the difference. 2 days later, at work, a coworker's name changed from Fred to Dan. I carefully asked around, but everyone said his name had always been Dan. I figured I'd just been mistaken. Then, as ridiculous as this sounds, I was peeing in my bathroom at home when I suddenly found myself on a random street. I was still in my pajamas, pants down, and urinating, but now in full view of a dozen people at a bus stop. Horrified, I pulled up my clothes and ran before someone called the cops. I did manage to get home, but the experience forced me to admit that I was still in danger. The entity was doing something to me, and I didn't understand how to fight back. Mar showed up that evening, but she had her own key. "Hey," I asked her with confusion. "How'd you get a key?" She just laughed. "You're cute. Are you sure you're okay with this?" She opened a door and entered a room full of boxes. I know living together is a big step, especially when we've only been dating 3 months. Living together? I'd literally just met her the week before. Thing was, my mother had always called me a smart cookie for a reason. I knew when to shut my yap. Instead of causing a scene, I told her everything was fine, and then I went straight to my room and began investigating. My things were just as I had left them, with no sign of a 3-month gap in habitation, but I did find something out of the ordinary: the date. I shivered angrily as I processed the truth. The entity had eaten 3 months of my life. What the hell was I facing? What kind of creature could consume pieces of one's soul like that? I'd missed the most exciting part of a new relationship, and I would never understand any shared stories or in-jokes from that period. Something absurdly precious had been taken from me, and I was furious. That fury helped suppress the entity. I never imbibed alcohol. I drank coffee religiously. I checked the date every time I woke up. For 3 years, I managed to live each day while observing nothing more than minor alterations. A social fact here and there, someone's job, how many kids they had, that sort of thing, the layout of nearby streets, the time my favorite television show aired, that kind of thing. Always, those changes reminded me the creature still had its claws sunk into my spirit. Not once in 3 years did I ever let myself zone out. One day, I grew careless. I let myself get really into the season finale of my favorite show. It was gripping, a fantastic story. Right at the height of the action, a young boy came up to my lounger and shook my arm. Surprised, I asked, "Who are you? How did you get in here?" He laughed and smiled brightly. "Silly daddy." My heart sank in my chest. I knew immediately what had happened. After a few masked questions, I discovered that he was 2 years old, and that he was my son. The agony and heartache filling my chest was nearly unbearable. Not only had I missed the birth of my son, I would never see or know the first years of his life. Mar and I had obviously gotten married and started a family in the time I'd lost, and I had no idea what joys or pains those years contained. It was snowing outside. Holding my sudden son in my lap, I sat and watched the flakes fall outside. What kind of life was this going to be if slips in concentration could cost me years? I had to get help. The church had no idea what to do. The priest didn't believe me and told me I had a health issue rather than some sort of possession. The doctors didn't have any clue. Nothing showed up on all their scans and tests, but they happily took my money in return for nothing. By the time I ran out of options, I decided to tell March. There was no way to know what this all looked like from her side. What was I like when I wasn't there? Did I still take our son to school? Did I still do my job? Clearly, I did, because she seemed to be none the wiser, but I still had a horrible feeling that something must have been missing in her life when I wasn't actually home inside my own head. But the night I set up a nice dinner in preparation, she arrived not by unlocking the front door, but by knocking on it. I answered, and found that she was in a nice dress. She was happily surprised by the settings on the table. A fancy dinner for a second date? I knew you were sweet on me. Thank the Lord I knew when to keep my mouth shut. If I'd gone on about being married and having a son, she might have run for the hills. Instead, I took her coat and sat down for our second date. Through carefully crafted questions, I managed to deduce the truth. This really was our second date. She saw relief and happiness in me, but interpreted that as dating jitters. I was just excited to realize that the entity wasn't necessarily eating whole portions of my life. The symptoms, as I was beginning to understand them, were more like the consequences of a shattered soul. The creature had wounded me, broken me into pieces. Perhaps I was to live my life out of order, but at least I would actually get to live it. And so it went for a few years, from my perspective. While minor changes in politics or geography would happen daily, major shifts in my mental location only happened every couple months. When I found myself in a new place and time in my life, I just shut up and listened, making sure to get the lay of the land before doing anything to avoid making mistakes. On the farthest flung leap yet, I met my 6-year-old grandson, and I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He said, writer. I told him that was a fine idea. Then, I was back in month 2 of my relationship with Mar, and I had the best night with her on the riverfront. When I say the best, I mean the best. Knowing how special she would become to me, I asked her to move in. I got to live through what I'd missed the first go-around, and I came to understand that I was never mentally absent. I would always be there, eventually. When we were moving her boxes in, she stopped for a moment and said she marveled at my great love, as if I'd known her for a lifetime and never once doubted she was the one. That was the first time I'd truly laughed freely and wholeheartedly since the entity had wounded me. She was right about my love for her, but for exactly the reason she considered a silly romantic analogy. I had known her my whole life, and I'd come to terms with my situation and found peace with it. It wasn't so bad to have sneak peeks at all the best parts ahead. But of course, I wouldn't be writing this if it hadn't gotten worse. The entity was still with me. It had not wounded me and departed like I'd wanted to believe. The closest I can describe my growing understanding was that the creature was burrowing deeper into my psyche, fracturing it into smaller pieces. Instead of months between major shifts, I began having only weeks. Once I noticed that trend, I feared my ultimate fate would be to jump between times in my life heartbeat by heartbeat, forever confused, forever lost. Only an instant in each time meant I would never be able to speak with anyone else, never be able to hold a conversation, never express or receive love. As the true depth of that fear came upon me, I sat in an older version of me and watched the snow falling outside. That was the one constant in my life. The weather didn't care who I was or what pains I had to face. Nature was always there. The falling snow was always like a little hook that kept me in a place. The pure emotional peace it brought was like a panacea on my mental wounds. And I'd never yet shifted while watching the pattern of falling white and thinking of the times I'd gone sledding or built a snow fort as a child. A teenager touched my arm. Grandpa. Eh? He startled me out of my thoughts, so I was less careful than usual. Who are you? He half grinned, as if not sure whether I was joking. Handing me a stack of papers, he said, "It's my first attempt at a novel. Would you read it and tell me what you think?" Ah, of course. Pursuing that dream of being a writer, I see. He burned bright red. Trying to, anyway. All right. Run off. I'll read this right now. The words were blurry, and, annoyed, I looked for glasses I probably had for reading. Being old was terrible, and I wanted to leap back into a younger year, but not before I read his book. I found my glasses in a sweater pocket and began leafing through. Mar puttered in and out of the living room, still beautiful, but I had to focus. I didn't know how much time I would have there. It seemed that we had relatives over. Was it Christmas? A pair of adults and a couple kids I didn't recognize tromped through the hallway, and I saw my son, now adult, walk by with his wife on the way out the door. As a group, the extended family began sledding outside. Finally, I finished reading the story, and I called out for my grandson. He rushed down the stairs and into the living room. How was it? Well, It's terrible, I told him truthfully. But it's terrible for all the right reasons. You're still a young man, so your characters behave like young people, but the structure of the story itself is very solid. I paused. I didn't expect it to turn out to be a horror story. He nodded. It's a reflection of the times. Expectations for the future are dismal, not hopeful like they used to be. You're far too young to be aware like that, I told him. An idea occurred to me. If you're into horror, do you know anything about strange creatures? Sure. I read everything I can. I love it. Warily, I scanned the entrances to the living room. Everyone was busy outside. For the first time, I opened up to someone in my life about what I was experiencing. In hushed tones, I told him about my fragmented consciousness. For a teenager, he took it well. You're serious? Yes. He donned the determined look of a grown man accepting a quest. I'll look into it, see what I can find out. You should start writing down everything you experience. Build some data. Maybe we can map your psychic wound. Well, sounds like a plan. I was surprised. That made sense, and I hadn't expected him to have a serious response. But how will I get all the notes in one place? Let's come up with somewhere for you to leave them, he said, frowning with thought. Then I'll get them, and we can trace the path you're taking through your own life, see if there's a pattern. Advertisements. For the first time since the situation had gotten worse, I felt hope again. How about under the stairs? Nobody ever goes under there. Sure. He turned and left the living room. I peered after him. I heard him banging around near the stairs. Finally, he returned with a box, laid it on the carpet, and opened it to reveal a bursting stack of papers. He exclaimed, "Holy crap." But of course, being a teenager, he didn't really say crap. Taken aback, I blinked rapidly, forgiving his cussing because of the shock. Did I write those? He looked up at me with wonder. Yeah. Or, you will. You still have to write them, and put them under the stairs after this. He gazed back down at the papers, then covered the box. So you probably shouldn't see what they say. That could get weird. That much I understood. Right. He gulped. There are like 50 boxes under there, all filled up like this. Deciphering these will take a very long time. His tone dropped to deadly seriousness. But I will save you, Grandpa. Because I don't think anyone else can. Tears flowed down my cheeks then, and I couldn't help but sob once or twice. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become in my shifting prison of awareness until I finally had someone who understood. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then I was young again, and at work on a random Tuesday. Once the sadness and relief faded, anger and determination replaced them. After I finished my work, I grabbed some paper and began writing. While the weeks shifted around me, while those weeks became days, and then hours, I wrote every single spare moment about when and where I thought I was. I put them under the stairs out of order. My first box was actually the 30th, and my last box was the first. Once I had over 50 boxes written from my perspective, and once my shifting became a matter of minutes, I knew it was up to my grandson to take it from there. I put my head down and stopped looking. I couldn't stand the river of changing awareness any longer. Names and places and dates and jobs and colors and people were all wrong and different. I'd never been older. I sat watching the snow fall. A man of at least 30 that I vaguely recognized entered the room. Come on, I think I finally figured it out. I was so frail that moving was painful. Are you him? Are you my grandson? Yes. He took me to a room filled with strange equipment and sat me in a rubber chair facing a large mirror twice the height of a man. The pattern finally revealed itself. How long have you worked on this? I asked him, aghast. Tell me you didn't miss your life like I'm missing mine. His expression was both stone cold and furiously resolute. It'll be worth it. He brought 2 thin metal rods close to my arm and then nodded at the mirror. Look, this shock is carefully calibrated. The electric zap from his device was startling, but not painful. In the mirror, I saw a rapid arcing light silhouette appear above my head and shoulder. The electricity moved through the creature like a wave, briefly revealing the terrible nature of what was happening to me. A bulging leech-like mouth was wrapped around the back of my head, coming down to my eyebrows and touching each ear, and its slug-like body ran over my shoulder and into my very soul. It was a parasite, and it was feeding on my mind. My now-adult grandson held my hand as I took in the horror. After a moment, he asked, "Removing it is going to hurt very badly. Are you up for this?" Fearful, I asked, "Is Mar here?" His face softened. No, not for a few years now. I could tell from his reaction what had happened, but I didn't want it to be true. How? We have this conversation a lot, he responded. Are you sure you want to know? It never makes you feel better. Tears brimmed in my eyes. then I don't care if it hurts or if I die. I don't want to stay in a time where she's not alive." He made a sympathetic noise of understanding and then returned to his machines to hook several wires, diodes, and other bits of technology to my limbs and forehead. While he did so, he talked, "I've worked for 2 decades to figure this out, and I've had a ton of help from other researchers of the occult. This parasite doesn't technically exist in our play. It's one of the lesser spawns of Set, and it feeds on the plexus of mind, soul, and quantum consciousness/reality. When details like names and colors of objects changed, you weren't going crazy. The web of your existence was merely losing strands as the creature ate its way through you. I didn't fully understand. I looked up in confusion as he placed a circlet of electronics like a crown on my head in exact line with where the parasite's mouth had ringed me. "What's Set?" He paused his work and grew pale. "I forgot that you wouldn't know. You're lucky, believe me." After a deep breath, he began moving again and placed his fingers near a few switches. "Ready? This is carefully tuned to make your nervous system extremely unappetizing to the parasite, but it's basically electroshock therapy." I could still see Mars smile. Even though she was dead, I'd just been with her moments ago. "Do it." The click of a switch echoed in my ears, and I almost laughed at how mild the electricity was. It didn't feel like anything, at least at first. Then, I saw the mirror shaking and my body within that image convulsing. Oh, no. It did hurt. Nothing had ever been more painful. It was just so excruciating that my mind hadn't been able to immediately process it. As my vision shook and fire burned in every nerve in my body, I could see the reflected trembling light silhouette of the parasite on my head as it writhed in agony equal to mine. It had claws, 6-clawed lizard-like limbs under its leech-like body, and it cut into me in an attempt to stay latched on. The electricity made my memories flare. Mars' smile was foremost, lit brightly in front of a warm fire as the snow fell past the window behind her. The edges of that memory began lighting up, and I realized that my life was one continuous stretch of experience. It was only the awareness of it that had been fragmented by that feasting evil on my back. I'd never managed to be there for the birth of my son. I jumped around it a dozen times, but never actually lived it. For the first time, I got to hold Mars' hand and be there for her. No. That moment had shifted seamlessly into holding her hand as she lay in a hospital bed for a very different reason. Not this. God. Why? It was so merciless to make me remember this. I broke down in tears as nurses rushed into the room. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to experience it. I'd seen all the good parts, but I hadn't wanted the worst part, the inevitable end that all would one day face. It wasn't worth it. It was tainted. All that joy was given back 10,000-fold as pain. The fire in my body and in my brain surged to sheer white torture, and I screamed. My scream faded into a surprised shout as the machines and electricity and chair faded away. Snow was no longer falling around my life. I was out in the woods on a bright summer day. Oh God. I turned to see the creature approaching me. It was the same absence of meaning, the same blank on reality. It crept forward, just like before, but this time, it hissed and turned away. I stood, astounded at being young again and freed from the parasite. My grandson had actually done it. He'd made me an unappetizing meal, so the predator of mind and soul had moved on in search of a different snack. I returned home in a daze, and while I was sitting there processing all that had happened, the phone rang. I looked at it in awe and sadness. I knew who it was. It was Marjorie, calling for the first time for some trivial reason she'd admit 30 years later was made up just to talk to me. But all I could see was her lying in that hospital bed dying. It was going to end in unspeakable pain and loneliness. I would become an old man, left to sit by myself in an empty house, his soulmate gone long before him. At the end of it all, the only thing I would have left, sitting and watching the falling snow. But now, thanks to my grandson, I would also have my memories. It would be a wild ride, no matter how it ended. On a sudden impulse, I picked up the phone. With a smile, I asked, "Hey, who's this?" Even though I already knew. I have a friend, Tomas, who works as a freelance artist, creating booths and installations for event shows. He's quite talented at designing interactive presentations for companies to showcase their products. The last time we got together, he told me that he had signed on to be part of something big that he wasn't allowed to talk about due to an NDA. Then this past week, he included me as a blind carbon copy in the following email. As soon as I finished reading this, I gave Tomas a call, but the call went straight to voicemail. I drove over to see him, but when I buzzed his apartment, there was no response. His truck is in the parking lot. So at this point, I can't tell if he's just not answering or if he's not there. I know I don't have to wait to file a missing person report, but I'm going to give him a day to call me back, and then I'm taking this to the police. Mr. Fetterman. My name is Tomas Leron. I am one of the artists recruited by Mr. Gustav Svensson for the Beyond Vanablack, BV, project for your company. I won't beat around the bush here, sir. I am scared out of my wits. When I was first approached and offered the chance to work with the next step in Vanablack, it was like winning the lottery. Vanablack's nearly 100% absorption is a fantastic achievement. I assumed that the only possible next step was perfect 100% light absorption. But when I was shown how BB not only absorbed all light, but even some of the scattered light of the surrounding area, I was astounded. The way it strips away the defined edges of an object, like it's enveloping the thing in a black fog, is breathtaking. I'm telling you this because I assume you've never actually seen BB used before. If you had, you would not have approved the production of it. The color is unnatural, sir. It does not belong in this world. When we look up at the night sky, we think we are seeing the pure absence of light. But we aren't. Light reflected off the atmosphere, light from the Earth, Moon, and other stars protects us from the true emptiness of the void. BB is the void, Mr. Fetterman. It extends beyond the boundaries we give it and sucks away the light from everything around it. I am writing to you today because something has happened. I, along with 2 other artists, Genevieve Laver and Pyotr Adartu, were asked to come up with 3 unique exhibits with which to show off the glory of Beyond Vanablack, which we did. My own art installation remains in your research department, unfinished, where it shall remain as I have no intention of working further on it. Ms. Laver's idea was a room, the inside of which was completely painted with BV, save for one wall, which was installed with a full-length mirror from floor to ceiling. I've been inside the room, and it is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. Imagine stepping into absolute nothingness. With every step, you're unable to determine if your foot is going to touch solid ground or not. To make matters worse, she had the floor installed at a slant, so as you try to walk toward the center, you're going up an incline but can't see the angle at which it goes. There is a single, white light in the center of the ceiling, for the sake of allowing whoever is inside to at least see themselves. Otherwise, it would be like not existing at all, just pure blackness. Because of the unique properties of BV, though, you cannot actually see the light in the ceiling, even when staring directly at it. Once the door is sealed, the occupant is trapped inside with only their reflection. The effect is unnerving. Yesterday, after Ms. Laver finished her project, she shut herself inside the room. I presumed to see how it looked. I was busy in my own area, working on my project. Half an hour later, I heard yelling. Hurrying down the hall to her room, I saw a crowd of people surrounding the area, and I was quickly ushered away before I could see what was going on. After things quieted down, I managed to ask one of your engineers what had happened. He told me that someone had gone to check on Ms. Laver and found the poor woman sprawled in the center of her room, bloody and crying. She had clawed out her own eyes, Mr. Fetterman. Somehow, her experience in the room drove her to take her own side. When I asked Mr. Svensson about it, he told me that only Genevieve had had an accident, but that she was taken to the hospital and would be okay. As I mentioned, I'd been in the room myself, having gone in later that day. Security had cordoned the room off, but nobody was monitoring the area, so it wasn't difficult to get inside. The effect of the room's design, with its BV blackened interior and slanted floor, is almost instantaneous. Within seconds, I felt nauseated and had to resort to crawling to reach the middle of the room, all the while watching as my hands disappeared into the black fog. As I went, my need for visual stimuli forced me to keep my eyes on the mirror across the room. In it, I started to see things that couldn't possibly exist. First, the air seemed to fill with swirling tendrils of color, followed by sparks of light like the flashbulb of a camera, floating, and ghostly, disembodied eyes watching me. Worst of all, though, was my reflection looking back at me. I don't know how, maybe the floor was curved toward the mirrored wall or the lack of defined space messed with my sense of direction. All I know is that I found myself crawling toward my reflection rather than the center of the room. Or worse, my reflection was crawling toward me, staring at me, watching me approach. I tried to change direction, but I swear to you, it kept crawling toward me no matter how I tried to orient myself. And the more I looked into the eyes of my own reflection, the less human it appeared. Every second, it was like watching my face smear like a painting, my eyes, cheeks, nose, and lips turning runny like melted wax. But the one moment I will never forget, the image seared into my brain of the entire experience. was when I stopped in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, it staring back at me, and then tried to stand up. As I raised my head, I found myself looking over the shoulder of my own reflection and seeing my face again, behind the reflection, also looking over it. In other words, the face I had come to accept as my own was not. There was someone else between me and the mirror, someone who, even as the realization came rushing at me, stared up at me with the same horrified expression on its face, its features melting. It was too much. I was ready to follow Genevieve and claw my own eyes out. The only reason I'm here and able to tell you about it now is that I let go. I just let myself fall backward, striking my head on the floor in the process. I blacked out a bit, but I remember rolling down the slanted floor and then hitting the wall. The door must have been swung open from the force, because when I came, I could see out into the hallway, and I dragged myself out. I swear that before I got out and shut the door, I looked back and saw my reflection, only it was standing in the center of the room, watching me leave. That room is cursed. BB has turned it into the residence of something sinister and malevolent. But that's not even half of it, Mr. Fetterman. Fyodor Darta's plan was the polar opposite of Ms. Laver's. Rather than a person in a room devoid of light, he had your team help him build a full-coverage cloth bodysuit using the BB process. Now, everything upsetting about Laver's room could be explained away as tricks of the mind, ignoring the fact that she is currently missing. What happened to Pyotr, though, I assure you, cannot be explained. This suit was finished a week before Ms. Laver completed her room. I watched him be helped into the suit for the first time, the team struggling to find where his legs went, then his arms. Once he had all 4 limbs clothed, they still had to find the zipper and hood to completely seal him in. Upon donning the full body suit of BB, the effect was truly astounding. Pyotr became a foggy, black silhouette. You couldn't tell if you were looking directly at him. He had his workroom installed with almost 24 large flood lamps, drowning out every angle with harsh lighting, and still the suit cast a shadow. Nobody else in the room had a shadow, but Pyotr in his suit did. Even more amazing, when he moved, he left a trail of blackness, a sort of afterimage of where he had been. I've never seen anything like it. He put the BB suit on for short intervals every day, increasing the length he spent inside each time. He told me he enjoyed the way it unnerved the people around him. I asked him what it was like inside, and he remarked, "I can see inside you. I can see your bones." I'm not sure if he was joking or not. Pyotr spent every workday setting up and taking photos of himself against various backdrops to see how the BB of the suit affected the pictures. There was one I saw of him standing in a glass box filled with water. The water looked like ink. Pyotr told me that the way water refracts light, it seems to magnify the BB's absorption effect. After Laver's incident, but before I went into her room and experienced the horror of that emptiness firsthand, I rushed to Pyotr's dressing room to tell him what had happened. He had been wearing the suit since before I got to work, the longest amount of time he'd ever kept it on. He was sitting at his desk, clad completely in the BB bodysuit. I told him of Laver, and he became understandably distraught, asking me to help him out of the suit so we could get to the hospital. At first, I couldn't find the zipper. My hands would disappear in the foggy blackness of the suit's effect. Eventually, I found it and unzipped him. There was nothing inside, Mr. Fetterman. The suit fell away as if draped on a frame of empty air, the hood deflating like a balloon and dropping to the floor along with the rest of the material. Stranger yet, Pyotr still seemed to be inside the suit. It was pulled up on the floor in an undefinable pile, like a hole in the floor, but I could hear him from inside it. And whatever he was, wherever he was, he sounded terrified. I could hear him start to scream, echoing from out of the suit's interior like he was falling through a great, endless void, his voice never fading off like it does as someone falls away. He was always right there, screaming, calling my name, and begging me to get him out. I gathered up the material and tried shaking it, thinking maybe I could shake him out of the hole, but I had to drop it quickly because the way my hands disappeared inside it, I was afraid I would fall into the suit as well. I immediately hurried to Mr. Srenson's office across the research area and told him about Pyotr. He seemed more put out than concerned, made a quick phone call, and then told me to stay put while he marched off to Pyotr's room with a group of men from your security. I sat around in his office for a couple hours before he finally returned with a gentleman named Mr. Klein from your legal department. They assured me that Pyotr was all right and that what I had seen was simply the BB playing tricks on my eyes. They fed me a bunch of hogwash about how my vision hadn't fully adjusted to the bright lighting of the room, then instructed me to sign a form to waive my rights towards speaking about either of the incidents. It was after that After they had someone escort me back to my own work area, that I ventured over to Genevieve's room and experienced its horror myself. That was yesterday, Mr. Fetterman. I called in sick this morning, with no intention of going in today, or any other day, out of fear for my own safety. Already, my phone has rung at least 20 times this morning from different unknown callers. Mr. Svensson tried to reach me half an hour ago, and left me a cryptic voicemail saying, "I hope that we don't have to initiate a breach of contract clause." I've looked over my contract with your company, Demtronic, but I still have no idea what he meant by that. It sounds like a threat. There is something evil in Beyond Vanablack, Mr. Fetterman, something Mr. Svensson does not want people to know about. Miss Laver is missing. Mr. Adart was missing. I'm afraid that I may go missing as well. I hope that I'm not making a grave mistake by trusting you with this information. Please contact me via this email address or the number provided below. Sincerely, Tomas Laron, Artist for Hire. It only took her a moment to figure out that this wasn't where she wanted to be. The paint chipped and the wallpaper peeled down as if bowing its head in resignation to the dilapidated state of the facility. She walked gingerly up the hall, dodging the debris that lay scattered across the yellowed laminate floor. An old, rusted wheelchair sat propped against a side door that led to nothing but darkness, as far as she could tell as she passed it. A pair of crutches leaned against the jamb of another door to her right, this one wide open to a room much more visible in the diminishing daylight. She made her way cautiously toward that door, nearly tripping over a loose section of flooring. When she got to the doorway, she peered in and felt her stomach churn with revulsion. There was a solitary window letting in the sickly, pale yellow sunlight through its dusty pane. The shadows from a tree outside played across the dirty floor and broke up the lazy dance of dust motes in the stale air of the room. Along the far wall was a single iron bed frame. Long ago, it had been painted a clean, clinical, crisp white. Now that the bars have rusted and chipped, the white has long since turned to a dusty gray, covering the dingy metal. The mattress sitting on it was sagging in the middle, striped, and so dirty that she couldn't tell what color it was originally intended to be. There were rumpled sheets that clearly never fit the thing at all, with a blanket and pillow tossed into the corner of the bed. Under it was the barest shadow of an old suitcase, its leather straps long ago sacrificed to the rot of this humid climate and the neglect of years past. In front of the bed, on the floor, was a pair of dusty shoes from a bygone era. They sat cockeyed, as if just slipped off by a young girl or boy whose feet turned inward from some shyness or infirmity. The toes of the shoes nearly touched, and the dust made the old leather look soft between the cracks. She had the impression that if she were to walk over and touch the shoes, they would crumble before her eyes. They certainly added to the smell in the air of dust and old. She found herself wondering for the first time about the most recent inhabitants of this facility, the rats, spiders, and other such creatures. Were they still here? Would they come out to meet her when the light dimmed enough for them to feel safe? She shuddered at the thought. As if bitten by her thoughts, an emaciated rat scurried across the floor in the room. Where it had come from, she couldn't say, but it seemed quite familiar with the surroundings as it dodged trash and equipment around the room to reach its destination, a small hole in the corner of the wall nearest her, next to the open closet. She willed herself not to scream or jump and watched the rat's maneuvers with a strange, morbid curiosity. When it dove into its hole, she found herself perversely drawn to crawl over to it and peer in, perhaps to see a family of rats sitting down to supper. She fancied the rat she saw was just going home after a long day at the mill, wherever that equivalent was in this place, and would soon put its feet up on a bit of fluff it had taken months back, ready to relax for the evening. It was at this point that she realized her mind was going to places she would rather it didn't, needing to keep her wits about her in this place. They had warned her that it would play tricks on her, and that her mind would try to trap her here somehow. She silently cursed her imagination and went back to searching the room with her eyes. She refused to enter that space unless absolutely necessary, and unless what she sought was in the room, she wouldn't enter it at all. She craned her neck around to see into the dark closet, where the door to the little cubbyhole was blocking the sunlight and turning it into a gaping maw of darkness. "Damn," she whispered when she realized she wasn't going to get a good view unless she entered the room. Keeping her eyes down and watching the floor for debris, She picked her way across this floor the same way she had in the hall. Something caught her eye for an instant, and her toe tapped the corner of a tin can, sending it rattling a few feet away. She held her breath, hoping the noise wasn't enough to elicit a response from the facility, and waited. 10, 20, 30. When there was no reaction, she let out her breath and turned her full attention back to the floor between her and the open closet door. She took a step closer, and she felt the floor rumble slightly. Her heart fell as she realized the sound had indeed woken it up, deep in the bowels of the building, and it was coming. The sound was faint at first, like rolling thunder. Except instead of coming from outside the dingy window, it was coming from further inside the building. As it drew near, the sound grew and changed. It sounded like rusty pipes breaking or children screaming. Then it sounded like the whole place was groaning, straining to contain the thing. She leapt to the other side of the room, far away from the door, and reached inside her coat for something. She wasn't worried about making noise anymore. It already knew where she was. She cursed aloud as she fumbled with a trinket that caught the sunlight and gleamed softly for just an instant. She could hear it coming up the hall now, bashing carelessly against the walls as it filled the space. It reached the doorway to the room she was in, and she hesitated for only a moment, the last fading sunlight repelling it. As the sun sank, her heart sank with it, knowing her best defense was gone. It turned then, facing her fully, and she almost shrieked in mind-numbing terror. It was surrounded by a black miasma, like smoke. Its head was impossibly high, easily 8 to 10 feet, and there was too little of it for what should have been this thing's head. That's when it hit her. The face was that of a child. That's why the head was too small. It was that of a small child atop this monstrosity. There were arms in the miasma that reached out for her, each of them capped by a hand with a face that screamed in horror and pain. The top head leered at her, and the whole thing lunged through the door. In the last possible instant, her hand went up instinctively to ward it off, to protect her face. She had no idea. It just went up, still with the trinket clutched in it. But though the sun had left, the trinket still gleamed and glowed. The creature shrieked and hissed, backing away but filling too much of the door. It was stuck. It crawled backward, up the wall, and away from her. She looked in her hand at the trinket, saw the glow, and thrust it out at the creature. It hissed and spat, its venomous saliva bubbling on the floor before the door. Slowly, it managed to back away out the door, with the paladin following, still holding out the amulet of a monarch to push it back. At the doorway, she stepped in the bubbling venom without notice, her entire focus on the creature and pushing it back out of the room. The bubbling venom fizzled and was still crystal clear as water on the floor. The creature pulled farther back down the hall, through another doorway, and then disappeared. She could hear it moving and feel the floor still shaking with its many-handed steps. Eventually they faded to nothing, and she breathed a sigh of relief, replacing the amulet in her interior pocket. She had hoped to not have to show her hand so soon, but if that was the guardian here, things might be worse than they had thought at the time. She would need to consult with the monks back at the monastery before venturing any further in, much as she detested the delay. She made her way back up the hall to the front doors, pulling the pitted and rusty handle gently to open the large portal. As she gained the dusk outside, she heard a whimpering whine from deep in the facility and knew that, for the moment, the creature would hide and lick its wounds rather than chase. There is no fear as potent as the fear of the unknown. No monstrous visage discovered yet has been as terrifying as the infinite potential for horror which exists before the mask is removed. That is why we humans, in our naive misunderstanding of the universal order, are gripped by the mortal fear of death. We think it the final frontier, the greatest imaginable unknown from whose penumbral shores no traveler may return. And so we cling desperately on to even the most dreary and anguished lives, suffering any known evil over our release into the beyond. But death is not to be feared, because death is very well understood. We have witnessed it, caused it, measured and recorded it to the last dying spasm of neuronal flickering. Even as I lay dying, it seemed silly to me that I should be afraid of the emptiness which reason promised to expect. While I was alive, I wouldn't experience death, so there was no reason to be afraid now. When I was dead, I wouldn't be capable of experiencing anything, so fear still had no cause. That thought brought me great comfort as I felt the last erratic struggle from my heart against the inevitable conclusion I approached. It wasn't until I was finally drifting off to sleep that a final intrusive doubt bubbled in my brain. What if it isn't death which is to be feared? What if it is what lies beyond? And so troubled did I slip beyond mortal understanding, stepping into a world as far forsaken by reason as I was now from life. I was still in the hospital room, but the bustle of nurses and the beeping machines lost their opacity as though I was mired in swiftly descending dusk. It seemed as though every sound was an echo of what it once was, every sight a reflection. With each passing moment, the world was becoming less real. But all that sight and sound, all that being, it wasn't simply disappearing. It was transforming into a figure beside me. The less real my room became, the more real the figure was, until presently it existed in such sharp actuality that nothing beside it seemed real at all. His cloak was black. Not the color black, but its essence. It was as though seeing a tiger after a lifetime of looking at a child's crude drawing and thinking that's all a tiger was. Reality flowed around his side like a brush through watercolors, and I could see each elementary particle and time itself sunder across its blade. Surely this, I thought. This is why we were taught without words to fear death. I clutched at my hospital blanket to cower from the intensity of the Reaper's presence, but the once soft cotton now flowed like translucent mist through my hands. I knew in that moment that nothing could hide me from the specter's grasp, for he was the only real thing in this world. You're late. They weren't words. My head ached from the strain of this knowledge as my lateness was burned into my awareness, imparted like an inescapable law of physics as unequivocal as gravity. We don't have time for the usual speech. Hurry now. I felt myself swept up around him like dirt in a hurricane. Before I knew what was happening, we were outside the hospital, moving at such a frenzied pace that the world around me blurred into a dizzying tunnel of flashing light. If you're lucky, IT will have gotten bored of waiting for you. I had too many questions, all fighting for attention in the forefront of my brain without any making their way out. You're quiet. I admire that. Usually people ask too much. What's the point? I asked. My voice felt flat and dead compared to his overwhelming substance. How can I try to comprehend something so beyond mortal knowledge? You can't. But it's still human nature to ask. We weren't slowing. If anything, our pace was increasing. I wasn't running, or flying, or anything of that nature. It was more like the rest of the world was moving around us while we stood still. A vague darkness and a heavy damp smell made me guess that we'd gone underground, but I couldn't say for sure. One question then, I asked. What else is here besides you? And that is why questions are pointless. Death is not a place, or a person. It's all there is. Troubling thought, but made more so by the growing howl which began reverberating the rocks around me. We still seemed to be descending into the earth, and the air was growing warmer and denser now. The sound continued to mount as though the world itself was suffering. Then what is IT? What I'm here to protect you from. The rock split from a flash of his scythe, and the ground opened further into a sprawling cavern dominated by a subterranean lake. But I thought you said you were all there is. No, I said death was all there is. We weren't moving any longer. Light glinted off the side from some unseen source and streamed into the lake like a tributary. Once inside, the light didn't reflect or dissipate, but swirled and danced like luminescent oil. I thought you were death. Death is not a person. The light was taking a life of its own inside the water. The still surface began to churn with the enigmatic energy. It took my scattered mind a long while to realize that I was the energy flowing into the lake. I still felt tangled up with the figure, but we now existed as a beam of light boiling into the water. I knew I wouldn't understand, but that didn't stop me from feeling frustrated. If death is all there is, then what is IT? What was waiting for me? The water pressed in around me and I couldn't speak, although I could still draw breath somehow. IT is here. Something was in the water around me. Hands grabbed me by the legs and began dragging me downward. I was amazed to even discover I had limbs again. They felt so alien to me that it was almost as though this body was not my own. Light flashed from the scythe, then again. The hands let go, and the howling rose once more. The Reaper was fighting something, although I couldn't make any sense of the battle except for the madness of thrashing water. The howling earth reached its crescendo, and the screams made the water around me convulse and contract like living fluid. Had the Reaper cut it? Was I safe? I began to explore my new body in the water, but just when I thought I was beginning to gain control, the hands clutched me once more. I lurched downward, struggling in vain against their implacable grip. What is here? I tried to shout against the suffocating liquid. What is happening? But I couldn't sense the Reaper's presence any longer. The heat was unbearable, but the cold depths the hands were dragging me toward was even worse. I became aware of a blinding light at the bottom of the lake, and though I struggled, the hands dragged me inexorably onward. I'm sorry. I couldn't fight it off. It seemed to be coming from so far away now. We will try again next time. The pressure, the heat, the noise, the hands dragging me into the blinding light. I closed my eyes and screamed. I was free from the water now, but I just kept screaming. I couldn't bear to look at it, whatever had stolen me. Whatever was death but wasn't. Whatever even the Reaper could not defeat. Then words spoke. Real, human words from a real human mouth. My senses were so distraught that I couldn't make sense of them, but I'm guessing they were something like, "Congratulations. He's a healthy baby boy. Most people can't remember the day they die, or the day they were born. I happen to remember both, and I know that they are the same." The red lights are only making the pain worse. It is an immense, earth-shattering pain in my midsection and in my head. I try to move, but I can't. I try to speak, but I can't do that either. It hurts too much, and my voice obeys me no more than do my joints, my muscles, my bones, or my mind. And yet, still, there is movement. I can feel myself being lifted up and placed on something, a bed, maybe, or no, a gurney. All right, one of the EMTs says, and several others then roll me into the back of an ambulance and climb in behind me. But I'm already fading fast and feeling an inexplicable heat by the time those doors are shut. One EMT, a blonde woman, shoots me a curious little look, just as I'm slipping away, and says aloud, wait, I think I know. We're made of that stuff, right? I turned around. There was a woman there, red-haired and about my age, give or take, and she was alarmingly beautiful. But how long she'd been staring at the exhibit alongside me, I had no idea. "I'm sorry," I said. "You know we're made of that stuff, right?" She nodded at the museum wall, which depicted in detail the births, life cycles, and deaths of stars. I pursed my lips. "We're made of stars?" "Yep. Isn't it awesome?" She stepped up beside me and moved her arm across the diagram as she spoke. "I just watched a documentary about it last night. Stars are just fusion factories held together by their own gravity. They start off fusing hydrogen to helium, and then they keep going on and on, fusing heavier and heavier elements until they're fusing the heaviest stuff. Then they exhaust their fuel and collapse under their own weight, and they blow off their outer layers and pretty much shower the galaxy with all these random elements, some of which are eventually used to create life." Yeah, I'm Robin, by the way." She extended her hand, and I shook it. Hey, Brian. Nice to meet you." There was an awkward pause before I said, "All right, I got one for you. If you replace the sun with a black hole, what would happen?" "Depends on its mass." "No." The answer is, drumroll, please, nothing. I mean, everything would get dark and cold, but we wouldn't fall in. Earth's orbit would remain entirely unaffected. If the black hole had the same mass as the sun, what you said would only be true if the black hole in question happened to have the same mass as the sun. Which it wouldn't, because the sun isn't massive enough to collapse into a black hole. "Oh, damn. Yep. Me 1. You 0. Sorry, pal." "All right," I said. "You're on. Whoever gets the most points by closing time buys drinks." She smiled at that and punched me in the shoulder, just light enough not to sting. "All right, loser. Come on," the EMT says. There is a flurry of activity around me, and there are voices, 2 blinding lights, and a cooling down of that monstrous heat. One of the paramedics is looking me over. Then he looks to another colleague, the blonde woman, and he shakes his head slowly. "This one's gone, Rachel." But she continues running tests, running diagnostics, and placing a soft hand on my arm in case I'm awake enough to appreciate the comfort. I am. Barely. But I'm fading fast, and that heat is coming right back as I deal. "Not yet. He's not," she says. There's pain in her voice that she does her fruitless best to conceal. "I already lost one earlier, Todd. I'm not losing. Another one," Robin said, and I laughed and agreed, and we rushed to the back of the line. "See? I told you you'd like Ferris wheels. I can't believe you've never been on one before today." She shrugged. "I never thought they were as extreme as roller coasters, so I wasn't interested." "Well, they're not supposed to be extreme. Ferris wheels are for all the parents waiting on their kids and sick people trying to relax their stomachs so they don't puke funnel cake all over the pavement. And adorable young couples, apparently." And just then, we were waved into the next seat. We sat ourselves down, and moments later the great will began to groan and protest and, finally, to turn. It dragged our cart around its underside and then lifted it up to the top of its crest, where we could see the whole city at twilight, the ships in the harbor that were backlit red with the setting sun, and the clouds that were lined at their tops with just a little bit of starlight. Robin snuggled up next to me and put her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her waist. For a moment, then, I could have sworn the empty seat in front of us moved on its own and furrowed my brow. But then Robin spoke. "Thank you for being here with me," she said. I didn't respond with words. I just kissed her on the head and held her tight as the wheel began taking us. Down on the 1800 block of Gartersdale, one of the EMTs says, Yeah, another one. I know. Hell of a fucking night, isn't it?" The conversation is muffled again in short order. I'm drifting in and out, but the jostling of the room and the sound of an engine tell me we're still in the ambulance. The other paramedics, for their part, continue running tests and checking my vitals, and as they work, I try to remember what's happened. But it hurts. Damn it. Does it hurt? Almost as much as that rushing heat, and the effort is further disrupted when the ambulance hits a bump in the road and I nearly spill out of the gurney. But Rachel puts her steady hand on my chest and says, "Hang in there, Brian. We're almost there." Robin pointed at the interstate ramp, and I took the turn and put St. Thomas Vineyard away in the rear view. "I still can't believe Mason got married," I said. "He's only known that girl for what, a year? Less." Robin shrugged. They were in love. They hardly knew each other. They don't know if whatever they're feeling is genuine, lifelong love, or just a new relationship that hasn't worn off yet. I guarantee it, and I'll put money on this. They'll be done within a year. Just watch. "You don't know that," she said. There was a brief pause, and then she added, "We've been dating for 2 years. So, how far off do you think we are?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I haven't really thought about it." "You haven't thought about it?" "At all. I mean, of course I've thought about it. I don't know if we're ready, you know?" I looked over at her, but she just stared out there at the rain with her chin in her palm. So I continued. "Think about it like this. People prepare their whole lives for jobs, right? They start going to school as soon as they can talk, and they're not done till they're in their 20s, and it's all so they can get a piece of paper that says, 'Hey, hire my ass. I'm smart enough to work.' But marriage? Nobody trains for that sh*T. People just hook up and say, 'Hey, we're 25 or 28. You're cute. I'm cute. Let's spend $15,000 on a giant ceremony and then live as glorified roommates for 5 years until we're both fat and hate each other and get divorced because neither one of us knew or cared how much work this thing would require." There was a longer pause then, before she said, with a degree of seriousness I wasn't in the least bit prepared for, "Is that where you think we're headed? Glorified roommates?" Quickly, I calculated an avenue of retreat. But I calculated wrong. "No, not you," I said. "Not us. I mean, most people, you know? Most people just dive in and either get divorced or stick it out till someone gets heart disease. The divorce rate is now more than 50% in the US. But the 'I don't love you anymore' rate? Shit, that's probably close to 90 by the time everyone hits middle age. I just want to make sure you're the right person, you know? If ever there were words I wish I could have taken back, it were those 12. She said nothing, but I saw her reflection in the window, and the little tear that welled up in the corner of her I said more than words ever could. "Listen, that came out wrong. I just meant, can you drop me off at my car, please? I thought you wanted to come over. I don't feel good. Please." And we drove in silence for a while, as the rain picked up its pace and fell in sheets and torrents. After another 20 minutes, I made the turn onto my street and parked, and once I did, she got out without so much as a glance and walked across the road to her own car. I ran to follow. "Robin, wait." I grabbed her lightly by the arm. It was slick with rainwater. "Talk to me, please." "What do you want?" I blinked. "I want you to talk to me." I just asked Dash. "No, I mean with us. Where do you want this to go?" "Where do I want this to go? I want to be with you." "Listen, I didn't mean to imply that I don't want that. I just want us to be smart about it. You know? Well, maybe love isn't something you can calculate on a fucking spreadsheet, Brian." She was shouting over the cacophony of the storm. "Maybe it's just this thing you feel, you know? And maybe it doesn't make any damn logical sense. Maybe it's not supposed to. But that's part of what makes it special. It's an adventure. It's a jump off a cliff with me type of thing. And yeah, sure, not everyone survives the fall, I guess. But if you find the right person, then A jump off the cliff with me type of adventure? Come on, Robin. We're not writing up a damn dating website profile here. This is real life. There are kids involved, finances, house buying, mortgages, and all that shit. Not every day is some cute little romance comedy. This is half your life we're talking about. 2/3, even. Okay? All I meant was that you have to be prepared for it. I just dash. I thought we were prepared. What do you mean? She dug through her purse for a moment and then held up a ring that was brilliant even when covered in the rain. I felt my heart skip at least a full beat. Is that, it was my mom's, she said. She gave it to me before she died. She said, find your partner in crime, Robin. Find someone who'll sweep you off your feet and jump off a cliff with you. There was a pause before she added, and at the time she said it, I thought I knew exactly who that person was. I tried for a moment, but I knew, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that there was no combination of words in the English language that could be strung together to write this shit. Goodbye, Brian. She kissed me on the cheek and rubbed the back of her hand on it. And then she turned and got in her Civic and drove off until I couldn't see her taillights at all through the pouring of the rain's coming down hard. Boys, another of the EMTs said. Careful when you unload him. There were grunts of acknowledgement, and then the back of the ambulance flew open and the sound of the storm utterly exploded into it. I felt the rush of wind and the rain pelting my skin and sheets, and together they helped a bit with the oncoming heat that I still couldn't place. And then I felt movement. The gurney dipped and hit the pavement while the paramedics held me down. And then there were shouts, lights, and running feet, and then the hospital door. Open. I shouted. The man behind the counter shot me a look, but I shouted it again, over the sound of rain falling through the glass. I said, Are you open? And then he pointed at the sign saying the opposite and went back to reading. But I wasn't taking no for an answer. I dug out my wallet, pulled a 20 from the fold, and slapped it flat up against the glass. Within seconds, the paper was soaked with rainwater. But it got his attention, and he rolled his eyes, and the door clicked, whirred, and slid open. Make it quick, man. I know. I will. Thank you so much. I ran down the aisles and then, true to my word, made it back to the counter in less than a minute. The man put down his book and processed the sale. Date night? He said this as he bagged the card after the flowers. I smiled a bit. Something like that. And then I thanked him, ran back out to my car, got inside, took out the card, and scribbled on its inner sleeve the words, jump off a cliff. With me. A doctor running alongside the card motioned to some nurses in the hall, and they ran to follow. He turns to the EMTs. Is he stable? He's slipping. Heart rate's falling. Breathing is slowing. Not good. Mumbled something about being too hot earlier, but if anything, his temperature's too low. Someone shows the doctor a chart. He reads it as he runs, and his face is grim. Shit. All right, he says. Let's move. I shout at the car I'm passing. Just a little rain, assholes. But it wasn't. It was a lot of rain. Sheets and buckets and torrents of it. In fact, it had long since turned the dirt to mud, and it swept up against my windshield like ocean surf, and the road was slick with little rivers of it that ran on down past the pebbles. I was going far too fast for such conditions. But I didn't. I care about that, the doctor said. I just want to get his fluids up. Rachel, the woman from the ambulance, runs up and discusses my condition in harsh whispers with the doctor. As I fade, and as the damn heat floods back in, it becomes impossible to hear what they're saying. But it's abundantly clear from the body language that she hasn't yet given up. Hope for a reunion with these guys? Well, Bolin and Snake say they're against it entirely. So that doesn't bode well. But on the other hand, Sebastian said on multiple occasions that he's willing to do it for the fans. And look what happened with Guns N' Roses. A few years ago, nobody would have thought they'd get back together. I switched the radio off and then wrapped both hands around the wheel with such force that the knuckles turned white on the grip. The car hit 70 miles per hour. 75. 79. The windshield wipers were flying, but they weren't going fast enough. Fuck. I slammed my foot on the brakes as the lights of activity on the road came in out of nowhere from the rain. The car jolted and shuddered and fought for traction with the pavement, and I felt the tires squeal and the metal of the car grind in. Protest? I don't care if he wants to protest. The doctor snaps back. You tell him to wait in the damn lobby like everyone else. The nurse accepts her orders and heads back out into the hallway. I'm sorry, sir, she says. You can't see him until... Until what? That's my son in there. That's my son. That's Dash. And then there's a scuffle of feet and more shouts as a security guard drags my father from the wake. Rachel pauses as she hears the shouts, and then her eyes well up a bit with tears, and she looks at my face and appears to realize something. But she doesn't say what. The shouts continue, but they fade. And so do I. And in comes the heat as I do. That's my son, Dad says. That's my boy. Let me see my boy. Stop. Please. Stop. The police officer had both hands up as my car barreled towards him. Stop. Stop the car. Finally, there was a jolt and a shudder as the tires gained control, and the car slammed to a halt. Both the officer and I sighed in relief, and then he approached my window and tapped the glass with his knuckle. I lowered it. I shouted over the rain, "I'm sorry, sir. The roads are crazy out here. You okay?" He ignored the question. "I'm going to need you to sit here for a bit, okay?" he said. "Just until the accident's cleared up." "Accident? It's bad." He nodded in the direction of the wreckage, and then he said again, "Just sit tight. We'll wave you over when there's an open lay." And then he ran off into the storm. I scanned the scene. There was a man on the side of the road. I saw, sitting on the pavement with a poncho for the rainfall on his head and his hands. His SUV was totaled. The front end was bent, twisted, and hideously mangled. But the other car was in far, far worse shape than that. I squinted hard and could only make out panels of white amidst charred black chunks of metal and the force of the rain. But it was enough. It was a Civic. Oh, God. Oh, God. No. 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 I got out of the car and left the door hanging open in the rain, and then I ran forward, at least until the officer caught sight of me and ran back over and grabbed me by the shoulders. "Hey," he said. "I told you to wait in the car. What are you dash?" "Robin," I shouted over him. "Robin." And then I saw it, a fleeting glimpse of movement. A white sheet flipped on a gurney. A strand of red hair fell from the right side and hung there as the EMTs carted away the body. "Robin," I screamed. "That's my girl. That's my girl." The officer was confused and stunned and did the only thing he could think to do, drag me back to my car. "No. Stop." I was inconsolable but in no shape at all to resist. "Stop, please. That's my girl. Let me see my girl. Please, stop." One of the EMTs, covered in blood from the waist up, turned to look at the spectacle. But then someone shouted her name. "Rachel, the doctor says, you with us, or what? Let's go." She blinks as she stares at me and then says, Yeah, sorry. I just realized this guy was. Just get the charcoal, please? We don't have time." And she does. She runs off to fetch exactly that. And then I feel a hideously invasive sensation. A tube is being placed to my nose, and then I feel it falling down into my throat. I'm too weak to gag, but I somehow manage to clench my fist. A nurse sees the movement, and he holds me down to steady me. "Whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa. Are you okay, ma'am?" My roommate stumbled back as I threw open the door. I charged past him. "You're coming in hot." He said it again. "You good, bro?" But I ignored him. I went to the bathroom, and I leaned up against the sink for a long moment. I grabbed my temples, set my jaw, and sobbed without a sound, aching, racking, and heaving sobs. I heard a knock. "Hey, man," he said. "You good, dude? Anything I can get for you? Or dash?" "I'm fine," I managed. It wasn't convincing in the slightest, but I didn't care. I opened up my phone. There was a text from Robin there, from this morning. It read, "I love you." And they were all at once the most beautiful and the most painful words I'd ever read. "I love you. I love you too. I'm coming. Hang on, baby. I'm coming." Then I backed out, found my dad in the contacts list, and typed, "I love you, Dad." Moments later, I got a response. "I love you too, son. You okay?" But I ignored it, and then I threw open the cupboard, and I grabbed an old. "A bottle of pills," a nurse said. "Swallowed the whole damn thing. Lucky his roommate called it when he did." But the doctor is incredulous. Well, that remains to be seen, now, doesn't it? Then he turns to the door. "Ratch dash." And she pushes it open with her elbow before he finishes. I got it. I'm here. All right," he says. Fingers crossed, people. Let's see if we can't save a psycho. There are isolated chuckles. Rachel, though, almost snaps at her superior for the insult. But then someone says, "Here we go." And then there is thick, wretched black stuff funneling down that tube and down into my throat. I'm almost desperate enough, but not quite strong enough, to resist it. I can feel it sliding, hitting bottom, pumping and pulsing. My heart rate is erratic. My breathing is erratic. And my ability to comprehend the situation is every bit as erratic. I struggle as much as I can against the restraints, but all my effort and all my strength of arms muster up not more than the faintest whimper. But Rachel hears it. She moves to my side, and she holds my head and says, in soft enough whisper that only I can hear the words, "Don't follow her, Brian. Don't follow her. Please, Jesus. I need him here. I need this win." But I begin to fade, all the same. One by one, as the spikes on the EKG slow to sporadic pulses, I see the nurses turn to each other and shake their heads. One by one, that is, until there is only a trembling Rachel there, and she's holding on for me tight enough for everyone in the room. "Call it," the doctor says, just as the darkness swirls in, and I feel like I'm starting to fall away. The conversation carries on as I pass. 2:32 a.m., one nurse says. But I can hear Rachel screaming in protest. "No, he's not gone. There's still time to save him, there's still." But she's wrong. I'm already gone. Her voice and her face, those things are behind me as I pass. They're fading away into the darkness that's consuming me, swallowing me whole, and throwing me to the winds. And just when the magnitude of the situation dawns on me, then comes the heat. There are monstrous amounts of it. It rips and tears and scorches and scalds, and had I had the ability to scream out or even to breathe, I would have done so until my throat was hoarse. But then there is a new pain. A different pain. A hand reaches out of the blackness, and it grabs my left side forearm with such mighty force that the resulting pain eclipses that of the heat, and the nails of that hand rip right through the flesh. And then I'm being pulled, and there is a rushing wind. It is cool, refreshing, and beautiful, and suddenly I'm somewhere entirely else. I blinked. The darkness was gone, and the heat with it, and that sensation of being devoured. Instead, those things had been replaced with starlit clouds as far off in every direction as the eye could see. But my arm stung like hell all the same. I looked at it. There were nail marks, I saw. For deep cuts beneath the inner wrist and a fifth on the side, in the shape of a hand. They bled a bit, and then I heard an all too familiar voice. "You okay?" I stood up slowly, and I turned, holding my damn stinging arm while I did it, and said, Robin, what was that? That darkness? And the heat, and the... It's where you would have spent your eternity, Brian, had I not pulled you out. I had no words other than the weakest, thanks. You know, she said, holding her own arm. Suicide's not exactly what I meant by jumping off a cliff. I blinked again, and took a long, deep breath. Yet, I guess I didn't think things through. I'm not sure you fully realize how much of an understatement that is. Well, maybe I don't. But you know what? I'd do it again, Robin. I'm serious. She nearly rolled her eyes, but I doubled down on the sentiment. What did I say? Out there on my street? I'm sorry. I mean it. I'm sorry. You were right. Love isn't about taxes, headaches, or just tolerating each other until we're 70. It's like your mom said. It's about sweeping your girl off her feet. It's about jumping over cliffs with someone, not knowing where you'll land, and not caring as long as you get there together. And if this is where we land, wherever this is, I'm okay with that. And I leaned in for a kiss. But she stopped me with her hand before it landed, and I opened my eyes. I can tell you've been working on that speech for a while, she said. Over and over again in my head, in the car, until I got to the scene of the wreck. I looked at the ground, and then back up at her. And I realized, right then, that if you fucking left the earth itself, then I would, too. So here I am. I was wrong, too. She cut me off. What do you mean? About love. I was wrong. My mother was wrong. It's not just about crap you see in rom-coms and greeting cards, Brian. Again, I blinked. I know that. I know. It's something you feel in your heart that defies logic and reason. Not something you can put on a spreadsheet. Like you said earlier. She sighed a bit and then said, "Can I show you something?" "Oh, I guess so." "Sure." And then she took my hand. An infinity rolled in and faded back out, and all of a sudden we were somewhere else entirely. Are we? On the Ferris wheel? Yep. Turn around. I did, and there we were, past Robin and past me, on the seat above and behind us. I remembered it like yesterday. We were staring out at the whole city at twilight, the ships in the harbor that were backlit red with the setting sun, and the clouds that were lined at their tops with just a little bit of starlight. I rustled in my seat a bit, and it moved and passed. I saw it, and it looked like he was about to speak. But before he did, past Robin said, "Thank you for being here with me, and got a kiss on the head. What do you see? Robin said. Us. A year ago and change. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Your mom had just died, so I took you here. To get your mind off things. You did. That was the first day in months I'd felt truly safe and at peace. That was love. I know it was. And I still love you, just the S-. It's a kind of love, she said, cutting me off again. And it's absolutely beautiful when it lasts. But can I show you something else? Oh, okay. Yeah. She took my hand again, and again. Infinity itself rolled in and out like the tide. And then we were somewhere else. The hospital looked like St. Joseph's. What do you see here? I looked around. Nurses are running up and down the hallway. Doctors review notes and talk to their patients. I don't know. A hospital. She nodded in the direction of a particular room. Look in there. So I did. There was a woman on the cot. She was emaciated, hairless, and deathly frail, and the doctors inside were shutting off the last of the machines. A dying woman, I said. It looks like cancer. Yep. And what about there? I looked down. There was a nurse crouched down in front of the same door and talking to a girl, 8 or 9 years old, if I had to guess, in silly voices. The girl had been crying, but the nurse managed to make her smile a bit, even as her mother died on the other side of the door. It looks like a nurse comforting a little girl. That's right, Robin said. And that little girl will remember that nurse for the rest of her life, even if they never meet again or so much as exchange names, as the lady who came to her in her darkest hour and made her smile. She turned to me. That's love too. Just as beautiful and just as precious as what we had. What's your point? She didn't answer. She just stuck out her hand with a sad smile, and I took it. Infinity faded in and out a third time. And then we were in the waiting room. See that? Robin pointed to the corner of the room, and I squinted. Oh hey, what's Dylan doing here? He called the ambulance when you didn't come out of the bathroom, she said. He knew something was wrong, and when they drove you off, he followed them here. I have been standing there ever since, asking for information on you every time a nurse walks by. He's starting to annoy them. I watched my roommate for a bit, and sure enough, he grabbed a nurse and asked her a question that I couldn't hear. She said something pleasantly dismissive, and he nodded, then leaned his head back up against the wall and closed his eyes. Well, I had no idea he cared that much. That's love too, Brian. Would you do the same for him? But she held out her hand again before I could answer, and I took it. For the 4th time, Infinity Blake's. And then I was in the emergency room, looking down on myself. I was covered in vomit from the charcoal and the pills, but I was still, too, deathly still. Most of the nurses and the doctor were still walking out the door. But Rachel wasn't. She was crying openly now, and she made no effort to hide it. She reached for something. A needle, it looked like, or a syringe. What's she doing? You'll see soon enough, Robin said. But that there? That's also love. She held out her hand once again and said, one more. And I took it. And then we were in the parking lot of the same place. The rain was coming down harder than ever. Turn around, Robin said. And I did. And then I stopped. There were no words. It was my father in his car. He was holding a Bible up to his chest with both hands, and he was crying in a way no child should ever have to see their father cry. And that there, Robin said, that's the kind of love that can move mountains. I put my hand up against his window. He didn't seem to notice. He can't see you, Brian. Not from there. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Okay, I said. I get it. I fucked up. And then she released my hand, and all of a sudden we were back in the clouds again, under the stars. I wiped another tear before it fell. So now what? It's too late for me to go back down there. I'm already gone. Robin took another step forward and said, maybe not. And she put her hand on my temple, and my eyes rolled back. And then I saw it. Rachel and I are on a beach. Our child is playing out in the surf, and the sun hits her hair just right, and for a moment it is made of gold. And then the image fades, and another one takes its place. A birthday party. I have silver hair at my temples. Rachel does, too. But it doesn't matter. Our little girl is turning 10. And then that image fades, too, and is replaced by another, and another, and another, each one yielding another moment where someone loved someone else enough for it to break through the clouds and be seen forever. Even if the moment itself lasted only for a heartbeat. Finally, there is an image of Rachel and myself on a porch as old as we are, and she holds my hand and says, I'm glad you didn't follow her. And I say back, me too, and I kiss her on the head. And then Robin pulled back her hand, and there we were again, standing out there in the clouds together. How did you do that? I asked. She shrugged. Time has nearly no meaning in this place. I've been here for a while, Brian, and yet the doctors haven't even left your operating room. Don't think too much about it. Just think about what you want. That, I said. Was that my future? She shrugged again. Could be. I don't know what you saw, and I don't need to know. Was it enough? I nodded, and she stepped forward again and said, then go and get it. I'll miss you too damn much. Well, there's nothing wrong with missing someone, she said. That just means love lasted a little longer than what ignited it. So go ahead and miss me. You owe me that much. Feel the loss. Stand up to the storm like a man. Memorize the pain. Learn it inside and out. And let it roll over you in waves and run its course. And then one day you'll wake up and realize you have scar tissue where the skin used to be. And you'll be stronger than the grief ever was. I can tell you've been working on that speech for a while. Like I said, I've been here for a while. And then she kissed me one last time. And for the briefest moment, all the little scars, cuts, scrapes, and nicks in my heart were filled up and made whole. And she said, you're made up of the stars, kid. Now go light up the world. And then she was gone, Rachel. Okay? I'm not gonna tell you Agadash. But I shot up right before the doctor could finish the thought, and I gasped for air when I did and grabbed at my chest with more strength than I'd had in hours. There was a needle in it, a bolt of life to the heart, and Rachel broke down in tears when she saw me. Well, I'll be damned, the doctor said. Welcome back to the land of the living, son. And Rachel, she turned around. Good work, kid. Made me proud. And he left, and she turned back to me and tried to hide a smile while she did it. Hey there. How are you feeling? Better than dead. There was a pause before I added, hey, I'm glad you got your win. She took my hand and squeezed it. For a moment, she paused when she saw a scar below the wrist that looked like the result of fingernails dragging through flesh. But then she dismissed it and said, I am too. And you get yours. Okay? I promise you will. I said, I know. And with that, she got up and left the room to go save someone else's life, while I took out my phone, opened up the most recent text, and hit reply. AM now. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.